Hello and welcome to the DebtCircle Sundown Brief. I am Leela and here are today's key developments from the Indian debt markets. Let's begin with the highest yield listed corporate bond transactions. Monero Financial Services Private Limited recorded the highest listed corporate bond yield of 17.00% with a trade value of 76.00 lakh rupees. Regency FinCorp Limited recorded a yield of 16.00% with a trade value of 25.00 lakh rupees. Unifins Capital India Limited recorded a yield of 15.90% with a trade value of 2.00 lakh rupees. Another transaction by Monero Financial Services Private Limited recorded a yield of 15.70% with a trade value of 15.00 lakh rupees. Unifins Capital India Limited also recorded a yield of 15.6746% with a trade value of 10.20 lakh rupees. Moving to the highest yield unlisted corporate bond transactions. FDPL Finance Private Limited recorded a yield of 16.00% with a trade value of 18.00 lakh rupees. Apex Homes Private Limited recorded a yield of 14.00% with a trade value of 3,950.22 lakh rupees. Refined Finance Private Limited recorded a yield of 13.50% with a trade value of 300.00 lakh rupees. Nuvama Wealth Finance Limited recorded a yield of 9.00% with a trade value of 10.00 lakh rupees. Another transaction by Nuvama Wealth Finance Limited also recorded a yield of 9.00% with a trade value of 10.00 lakh rupees. Now, let's look at mutual fund debt transactions. Gross purchases stood at 9,359.59 crore rupees. Gross sales stood at 11,307.04 crore rupees. Net investment stood at negative 1,947.45 crore rupees. Net investment for August, month to date, stood at negative 36,271.300 crore rupees. Turning to foreign portfolio investor debt market investments. Under the general limit category, gross purchases stood at 189.76 crore rupees. Under the voluntary retention route or VRR, gross purchases stood at 601.91 crore rupees. Under the fully accessible route or FAR, gross purchases stood at 976.92 crore rupees. Gross sales under the general limit stood at 324.57 crore rupees. Gross sales under VRR stood at 532.85 crore rupees. Gross sales under FAR stood at 1,279.47 crore rupees. Net investment under the general limit was negative 134.81 crore rupees. Net investment under VRR was 69.06 crore rupees. Net investment under FAR was negative 302.55 crore rupees. For August month to date, net investment under the general limit stood at 349.95 crore rupees. Under VRR, it stood at 468.78 crore rupees. Under FAR, it stood at negative 179.94 crore rupees. For the calendar year 2026, year-to-date, net investment under the general limit stood at 56,787 crore rupees. Under VRR, it stood at negative 12,821 crore rupees. Under FAR, it stood at 39,118 crore rupees. Now the money market rates. The call rate stood at 5.18%. The tri-party repo rate stood at 5.02%. The basket repo rate stood at 5.16%. The special repo rate stood at 4.94%. Here are the India government bond yields. The 1-year yield stood at 5.72%. The 3-year yield stood at 6.18%. The 5-year yield stood at 6.31%. The 7-year yield stood at 6.62%. The 9-year yield stood at 6.77%. The 10-year yield stood at 6.77%. The 15-year yield stood at 6.98%. The 30-year yield stood at 7.45%. Now the Treasury bill yields and auction cutoffs. The 91-day Treasury bill stood at 5.28%. The 182-day Treasury bill stood at 5.55%. The 364-day Treasury bill stood at 5.70%. Moving to liquidity indicators. Net liquidity injected stood at negative 355,001 crore rupees. The standing deposit facility, or SDF, stood at 355,172 crore rupees. The marginal standing facility, or MSF, stood at 171 crore rupees. Now the MIBOR OIS rates. The 1-year rate stood at 5.75%. The 2-year rate stood at 5.93%. The 3-year rate stood at 6.04%. The 5-year rate stood at 6.24%. Here are the modified MIFOR rates. The 2-year rate stood at 0.00%. The 3-year rate stood at 6.94%. The 4-year rate stood at 7.03%. The 5-year rate stood at 7.09%. Now the currency markets. The US dollar traded at 95.23 rupees compared with the previous close of 95.07 rupees. The euro traded at 109.91 rupees compared with the previous close of 109.83 rupees. The British pound traded at 128.22 rupees compared with the previous close of 128.15 rupees. The Japanese yen traded at 0.60 rupees, unchanged from the previous close of 0.60 rupees. The Chinese yuan traded at 14.10 rupees compared with the previous close of 14.09 rupees. Now commodities and market indices. Gold, 24 carat with purity of 99.9% stood at 14,973 rupees per 10 grams compared with 14,575 rupees per 10 grams previously. Silver stood at 2,400 rupees per 10 grams, unchanged from 2,400 rupees per 10 grams. Crude oil stood at $80.16 US compared with $80.47 US previously. The Sensex closed at 78,954.76 compared with the previous close of 78,581.00. The Nifty closed at 24,636.00 compared with the previous close of 24,624.65. Finally, let's look at India's primary corporate bond issuances. IKF Finance Limited announced an issue size of 200 crore rupees with a tenure of 27 months, carrying a coupon of 9.00% and a credit rating of AA- from India Rating and Research Private Limited. Marwari Chandarana Intermediaries Brokers Private Limited announced an issue size of 150 crore rupees with a tenure of 24 months, carrying a coupon of 0.00% and a credit rating of A from CRISIL Ratings Limited. ICL FinCorp Limited announced an issue size of 35 crore rupees with a tenure of 37 months, carrying a coupon of 12.00% and a credit rating of BBB- from Acquite Ratings and Research Limited. That concludes today's DebtCircle Sundown brief. Thank you for watching. I'm Leela. Stay informed, stay ahead, and we'll see you in the next market update.